Hi, so it's been about 18 months since GTS was released, and I think it's fair to say that I was quite scathing of both the pre-launch demo and the launched product, to such a degree that I quickly put it back on the shelf and only broke it out really to see what the monthly updates brought. So a year and a half later, I wanted to look at what's changed with GTS, and more importantly, to see if I still feel the same about it. So I've been playing a lot of it recently, and really just wanted to give you my thoughts on the areas that I think have improved, where there still needs to be improvement, and what I generally feel about it. So I'm going to start with the areas that have been improved. First off, physics. GTS, now, it hasn't had a single major physics update yet. It's been more of a gradual series of change across the last 18 months. Changes that I'm glad to say have moved GTS in the right direction. So while it's still not a match for the likes of Assetto Corsa or Project Cars, the changes have been quite noticeable and have moved GTS into a much better place physics-wise. For me, this came to a head over the last few updates, with the turning point being a drive around the ring with an MX-5. And it was this car's drive and the way it reacted to load changes and the way the suspension behaves now and how that's fed back through the steering, that really does indicate to me that they have finally got their heads together with this. And, what is a little ironic, however, is that GTS as it is now drives in a similar manner to the build I actually enjoyed when I went to the Copper Box event. So it's a bit frustrating that we've had to wait over 18 months for GTS to get back to a state that's as good as it was in a build back in 2016. However, I am glad to see that it has, so it is a good positive change to physics. Graphics, rather obvious one this, but I still think it's worth calling out. I run GTS on a PS4 Pro, and it runs at a solid 60 frames per second, and it really does look stunning. It's always looked stunning. However, it's the lighting that's PD's area of real expertise, and it's still a star attribute when it comes to the graphics. And when you then expand that to look at things like photo mode and the scapes mode, it manages the title to step well past the uncanny valley and into shots that are about as close to the real thing as we've seen in any title, let alone just in the GT series. So graphics is always an area that's worth calling out as a positive for Gran Turismo. It would be odd not to. That leads on to the brother of graphics, audio. Now, let's be blunt, in the past the GT series has been quite rightly criticised for its sound quality, regardless of what some apologists have tried to claim in the past, and I've personally heard all of the excuses on this one. The series had some very fundamental issues with sound. GTS, however, is the title that really did turn that around for them. So it's not a genre benchmark in terms of audio yet, but it's definitely heading towards being a contender in this area, and a strong contender. One interesting area for the audio for me is how well it feeds into my tactile unit on my rig. So I run a Rekhorn 2.1 tactile unit with a bass shaker attached to it. And GTS does a really good job of pushing the low, mid and higher frequency feeds into my rig. So I get drivetrain thumps, vibration of the engine can be felt through every part of the rig, so the wheel, shifter, pedals, you get that engine rumble and tick over feel from it, as well as the sound. Things like curbs, expansion joints and the track surface can also be felt really well through the tactile unit, and that for me is a big plus in terms of audio, and it's arguably the area that I think GTS has moved the Gran Turismo series on in the most. So moving on, the updates. So ever since back in GT5, they started throwing out regular updates, and it's become something of a hallmark of the GT series. And GTS has continued this tradition. So we've had regular content drops of cars and tracks, something that was most definitely needed because the title was hideously light on both at launch. It's seen the physics change that have reinvigorated the series for me personally arrive, but also they've added in an entire single player mode into it as well. I'll come back and talk about that in areas for improvement a little bit, but at least they've added something in there. The only real blot on this positive of regular and free updates has been the introduction of microtransactions along with the car drops. Now, some people say it's a necessary evil given that DLC cars and tracks are free, but for others it's Kaz and PD going back on a promise not to use them. It's certainly divided the audience on how justified or acceptable they are, and I to a degree can see both arguments in regard to this, so I'm going to proudly sit on the fence when it comes to that one. Then we've got sports mode, and let's be honest, the influence of iRacing in sports mode is really clear to see, but that doesn't stop it from being a unique offering in the console market, and with the budget of Sony behind it and the FIA events, it really is a game changer for online console racing. Now, it's had issues, and it would be remiss not to point out that the penalty system is contentious, to say the least. There are constant online forum discussions about whether a penalty was justified or not, and whether it was unfairly given to X or Y, etc. And it hasn't, let's be blunt, been as effective at driving up racecraft and driving standards as I think PD had hoped it would be. Nor has the move of the daily events from actually being daily to this weird situation of daily events that change weekly been appreciated by all. Some people like it because it gives them lots of time to practice and repeat the event. Other people just think you do it a couple of times and it's done. So I think a good halfway house might be to have more events that are refreshed on a weekly basis, but I don't see that changing much. However, what I don't want that to take away from it is what PD have managed to achieve overall with sports mode, which is fantastic. It genuinely is. Or how risky a move making it the core of a Gran Turismo title was. Because let's be honest, that wasn't what the core Gran Turismo series was known for. It was known for massively expansive and long-winded career modes with a shed load to do, and online tacked on for the last few titles. So to switch that around was a big risk. And I think personally it's paid off because sports mode it's a good solid addition, and it's genre leading for consoles at the very least. And the last one of the positives I want to talk about is VR. So it is limited in scope. The VR integration in GTS has been more of a technical standout rather than a game changer itself. But this is interesting because VR is a natural fit to racing titles, but very few racing titles on the PS4 market have embraced it. So with GTS, the original Dirt Rally and Drive Club, they're the only ones that are really doing it with real cars in a sim or semi-sim environment. And of these, GTS is easily the best looking of them. Unfortunately, the trade-off you get for that is it's also the least featured of them. So those limitations aside, the quality of PSVR in time trials really is good, particularly given the limitations itself of the PSVR hardware. It really is an incredibly immersive experience, and it's one of the areas in the past that's always drawn me back into GTS as a title, as you can pick just about any car, take it around the ring or other tracks in VR, and it really doesn't get old. So VR for me is a standout and a really good selling point. It does help that unlike Drive Club and Dirt Rally, it was free as well, which it needed to be given how small a scale it is, but it was still nice to have. So all of that are the plus points, the things I really like with GTS as it stands now, 18 months down the line. But that's not to say there isn't still room for improvement, and I want to talk about that now. So I'm going to cover the areas I think that do need improvement. And I want to kick off with weather and dynamic time of day. Now I know that dynamic time of day is almost certainly going to need to wait for the next version of GT on the PS5, because I don't see PD taking a step back in terms of frame rate and resolution to accommodate dynamic time of day, and they would need to do that without a shadow of a doubt. But it's still a loss coming from GT5 and GT6, which had dynamic time of day and dynamic weather for that matter as well. However, static weather, or at the very least wet surfaces, is now a long time overdue. We know they can do it because we've had a very limited example of it in one of the missions. We also know that it's on the roadmap, or at least it was once on the roadmap for GTS, as we have rain and snow tyres that currently serve no purpose. So I'd really like to see weather included. I think it would push the physics engine that little bit more, and we get to see a bit more about what's going on underneath the surface with regard to that, which would be interesting. But also I think it would add another dynamic into sports mode and really challenge sports mode and the people playing sports mode. So moving on from that one, tracks. This for me right now is the single weakest area of GTS. It was rubbish at launch. I think it had 17 tracks or so at launch. It's better now because a lot of tracks have been added via updates. But the overall track count is still low. And I have to be honest, some of the new fantasy tracks are, in my view, quite weak in comparison to some of the classic fantasy tracks that we've had that are still missing and an awful lot of people are calling for. And we've also got a good number of real tracks that have been long-term regulars in the series now are still absent. The roll call for that is well known, but from a personal point of view, Silverstone, Spa and Imola would be high on my personal wish list to be included in. I personally can only hope that PD keep up the pace of the free track drops, or speed it up would be nice, and it's more biased towards Autopolis and those kind of real tracks or good fantasy tracks than Route X. We don't need any more Route X's. Thank you very much. I didn't need that in the first place. Give us some decent tracks. So moving away from tracks, I want to talk about AI and single player race structure. So AI is another one of those areas in which PD and the Gran Turismo series have always considered weak, and that's still the case for GTS. So it's not like audio where they've massively turned a corner. This is still an area where it's an issue. Now, at least nowadays we don't have to worry about cars just following a set racing line without any form of deviation. However, with the new independence the AI has found, it's also uncovered a long hidden desire it must have had to basically drive like a complete tool, because they will crash in odd places, and more infuriatingly, they will ram the crap out of you and cut in front of you and generally behave in a manner that would be too aggressive for the British Touring Car Championship, and that's saying something. And we then move on to the structure. So the AI is not quicker than it's been in the past, that much is quite clear, and to disguise this lack of pace we have the situation that really, as far as I can remember, first saw daylight back in the GT4 missions, and that's the chase the rabbit approach, where you start at the back or towards the back of a pack of cars, the lead car's way off in the distance already, and you've got to chase them down. So basically you're getting through what are little more than a series of moving roadblocks, and you have to try and catch and pass the leader before you run out of laps. It's got no relationship to real racing, and it's something I personally hope that PD and its AI would have grown out of by now, but that unfortunately isn't the case, and I hope one day it will be. And then the last of my negatives, but it's arguably one of my biggest one, and that's the grind. Maybe I'm just too old now to want to deal with it, but the progression system pretty much demands that you grind. The only alternatives are that you keep your fingers crossed in the daily reward, and good luck with that, because if you're anything like me you tend to get crap, or you use real money and the microtransactions. So unless you want to go down one of those two routes, you're going to be grinding, and you're going to be doing it a lot if it's a 20 million credit car you're going after, a hell of a lot. And I don't know about you, but GTS seems to me to be the least generous title to date when it comes to handing out money and prize cars. And to a degree this made sense at launch with the limited car count. However, we're a long way away from that now, and it would be easy to resolve. Being able to sell duplicate daily prize cars would be a start, and a return to something like the daily sign-in bonus would both be valid routes to take to try and alleviate some of the grind. So those are a look at some of the positives and also the areas for improvement over the last 18 months that Gran Turismo Sport has seen. So what do I think about it overall? The simple answer is that Gran Turismo Sport is now a title that, after a long time on the shelf, is very much back in my regular playlist. It doesn't have the physics of the likes of Assetto Corsa or Project Cars, and those who've known me for long enough will know the physics are my main draw. But the physics are now more than solid enough for me to enjoy and recommend. Throw in the visual and audio quality along with sports mode, and in all honesty, it's got a hell of a lot going for it and a hell of a lot to recommend it. And that's honestly why I'm quite happy to do just that. Gran Turismo Sport is now very much a title I would recommend people play and enjoy, whether they're more casual or a sim racer looking for something that's a little bit more accessible on a day-to-day basis. So GTS gets my recommendation, which I'm sure will surprise a few people over at GT Planet, who've known me for a long time, because as I said at the start, have been quite scathing of it up till now, but I'm quite happy to revisit, and I'm quite happy to change my mind when it's a valid reason to do so, and it is one now. So that's my thoughts on Gran Turismo Sport. If you found this useful or enjoyable, please do hit the like button. If you want to see more like this, subscribe away, and if you've got your own comments and thoughts, please do drop them down below. Thanks very much.